I think we have everybody for our so-called anchor desk. We can kick off the 2023 version of Targeting Healthy Longevity. Great to have everybody. We've got a small gathering audience, but it's going to quickly get larger as the commissioner comes in at the top of the hour. But great to have all of you. I'm here with co-founder and co-chairman, Professor Larry Steinman from the Junior University, as we finally call Stanford University. Larry, great to have you. And gosh, we go back to 2017 when we started this off.
Thank you, Zan. I remember actually taking a red eye into London and attending the first meeting at a nice venue next to Wembley Auditorium. Now with AI, I don't know whether I would have taken the red eye and just phoned it in.
Well, it's been great to have you all along the way. And certainly we think back to London with great nostalgia. I'm here also with Thomas Sir, CEO of Connexum and a senior official in the Kitalys Institute, along with Joan Manick, one of the first movers in the geoscience therapeutic development field, along with another prima mobile, Margarita Colangelo. Margareta is also a board member of Kitalys, and she is responsible for getting at least half of the audience here. So we are indebted to Margareta. Then Joan Manick is one of the real leading lights in the field and probably has gone further than anybody else in taking the therapy forward in this space. So great to have everybody on. Thomas, we've changed the name and the format of the conference, so you might say a few words about that.
Sure. I don't know how many of you know about what a neologist Zan is, but he coined the term metabesity, we think, at the Biotech Showcase in 2013 to refer to that constellation of chronic diseases of aging that have common roots and therefore could be addressed by common solutions. But over the years, we've received feedback that it's a weird word. It's hard to remember. It could be confused with it's an uber obesity or is limited to metabolism. So this year we are calling the conference, instead of targeting metabesity, targeting healthy longevity, putting it out right there in front so people know exactly what we're talking about. And instead of like 3 or 4 days in a row in October, as we've had in prior years, we're spreading it out over sort of a monthly format of free virtual webinars, culminating, we're discussing an in-person event at the end of the year. So please keep tuned to it. You can check out the conference, news about the conference at healthy-longevity.org, or you can follow the Kitalys Institute and be alerted to developments.
Thanks, Thomas. And Joan, great to have you back. You really have been a terrific co-chair of the conference, and so glad to have you today. You're on mute, Joan.
Delighted to be here, and it's going to be an exciting session.
Well, thank you for all your support. And Margareta, you are quite incredible, and your following, over 50,000 followers, really one of the first people in this neuroscience space, and also an expert in AI. So just a multifaceted, almost singularity among people in this field. Great to have you, Margareta, and thank you for all you've done.
Thanks, Ann.
Well, you can say a few words.
Well, there was tremendous interest in this. I received hundreds of messages from all around the world. And people were really excited that we're having this, but also they were really excited that Kitalys was hosting it. So, and there's many people who can't attend because they're in a time zone where it's in the middle of the night, but I'm going to write a recap and send it to everybody who showed interest. But I think of all the conferences I've been involved in the last 30 years, I received the most positive, excited messages about this conference.
Wow.
Really. So from the
So
ministries
good
of
to
health,
hear.
from hospitals, from universities, from scientists, from all ages. So it's a very lots of interest in this conference.
And as you say, it's global, people from all over the world. And
Mhm.
indeed, you've done a lot of global work. You're showing up in conferences all over the world, and it's quite remarkable that we have such a worldwide community. And last but not least, Jay Schuyler, who will be conducting the fireside chat with the commissioner. Jay, great to have you. You're actually down in Costa Rica, but the technology allows you to be present, and that's great to see you.
Looks like people are scattered all over. Larry's at Stanford. I see Amanda Adler from Oxford being on. So lots of people around the world.
Yes, hello, Amanda. Yes, indeed. There's so many people I'd like to acknowledge. I see my old friend and colleague Ron Hart, who was at FDA. It's been many years since we were there together, but we enjoy getting back together when we can.
Thank you, Zan. Good to be here. Interesting conversation on AI. David Frank and I who heads the medical section of AAAS, which has 38,000 members, and myself have just been discussing that problem about trying to develop a special workshop, because medicine especially is based upon the shoulders of those people who came before us. And we've heard that many times in the past. But we have to depend also on the data presented in publications being honest, that we may disagree with a theory or interpretation, but we can always trust the data presented. Well, that's no longer the case. And with AI being able to generate papers with or without really scientific information puts us all at risk relative to the quality of the database from which we're making diagnoses. And if we have false data we're trying to make diagnoses from, then we have problems with patients dying because of that fact. So while AI is wonderful, and we use it all the time in our labs to do our biomarkers and all the rest, it's also very frightening that it may be generating estimates of up to 10 to 15% false publications.
Many thanks for that, Ron. In fact, this is a subject of great interest and concern of the commissioner. I know he really does have a concern about misinformation in the field of health, and that may come up shortly. I see the commissioner is actually on, and he's a few minutes early. So instead of keeping him waiting, I will slowly bring him into the meeting. Califf, can you hear us all right?
I can hear you just fine. If I'm too early, let me know. I got plenty of work to do here.
I know you do. I know you do. Well, you're probably going to be multitasking while you do this, but it's just terrific to have you and your old friend and colleague, Jay Schuyler. You both go back to early days at Duke, and you respectively are experts in clinical trial design, cardiology, and diabetology. So I can't think of two better people to address the important issues related to preempting chronic disease, slowing the aging process, and having a greater degree of healthy longevity for our country and the world. So again, we can't thank you enough, Rob, and I'm going to go ahead and ask Jay to take over. We'll start just a few minutes early, but that's a good thing. Give us a little more time.
Well, thank you, Zan, and Rob, welcome. As a way of background for everyone, FDA's policies, practices, and planning related to drugs, devices, diagnostics, and nutritional products aimed at risk reduction of age-related diseases and disabilities, basically creating a healthy lifespan, is the subject that we're going to be discussing today. And my first question for Rob is, what kinds of evidence would be required to support healthspan related indications and product labels across drugs, devices, and nutritional products? We usually see that endpoints are related to a specific disease, and aging is not a disease, and we want to create a healthy lifespan. And so what are your thoughts on what kind of endpoints one could use? Could you use a multi-chronic disease composite endpoint, or what would you be thinking?
That's a very broad question to start with, Jay. Let me just note, when I was a mere medical student, Jay was a dashing young sort of paradigm of a young faculty member on the way to success. So, gosh, that was a few years ago, but lots happened since then. First of all, let me just make clear, I think you all know this, but the commissioner doesn't make decisions about individual products, but has a role in policy. That those decisions are made by full-time civil servants reporting up to center directors. And so I have opinions, but don't take anything I say as official policy unless I denote it as such. And first of all, what I'd say is in my career, I helped develop on the other side of the fence, on your side of the fence, I helped develop a lot of
You're muted, Rob.
not sure what happened, but can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, when did you hear anything I said before, or was I muted?
Yeah, we did. Just
It sort of
5
automatically
seconds.
muted itself. I'm not sure why that happened, but yeah, I used to be involved in developing endpoints as we developed cardiovascular outcome trials. And I would say it's, the laws really tell the FDA that we need adequate and well-controlled trials in the opinion of experts in the field. And in my outside experience and my knowledge here in the commissioner's seat, when there really is a consensus that's very broad, and the experts in the field in the relevant areas agree, then it's pretty common for the FDA to also be in agreement. That's actually what the law says. But when there's disagreement and disarray, and some experts say one and some say the other thing, then the FDA will typically revert back to the where there is common ground. So in this area, as you're all experts, and you know that it's particularly difficult. I would say, job number one is to find out where there is consensus and work on it. Within that frame of thinking, a lot of things are possible. Morbidity indices are possible. Organ function measurements are possible. But there's something that I think has tended to vary depending on the year you talk about with FDA, which I think is really important. Somebody needs to go on mute, I think. Okay. And that thing that's very important is that the charge to the FDA is benefits for the entire human being, not one part of the human being. And I would argue a lesson that I was very involved in, the push to do longer term outcome trials in diabetes. I think the payoff has been stupendous, because I don't know how long it would have taken us to distinguish the type 2 diabetes drugs that reduce death and major events from those that lower glucose but don't have much additional impact. And so even if you use a measure which is a surrogate or an intermediate clinical endpoint, I think as we go forward, the trials are going to have to be robust enough to give us the other information that we need about the outcome for the whole human being. And, you know, the place where I make an exception is if it's a rare disease where the numbers of people are small and the outcomes are critical in the short term. So that's at least my view of it. But again, I'm just a commissioner. I don't make these decisions.
Rob, on that point, the great one about the value of the cardiovascular outcome trials that have been done with diabetes therapies. We are now seeing the prospects that these agents will be targeted or even being targeted against other chronic diseases like neurodegenerative disease. And the only problem is doing one indication at a time will take literally decades, as in effect taking now, to work through the life cycle of developing these agents in multiple indications. So that brings us back to the multi-chronic disease composite. Would that make sense as a way to register an indication for age-related reduction in risk of multiple chronic diseases?
I think it makes a lot of sense, but I would add in the context that you know, if we think about gating of information content, you know, as Bob Temple used to teach me in the good old days, the hardest thing is to show that a drug has a beneficial effect at all, because 90%, it's still the case. Somebody just looked at it, about 90% of drugs that get into phase 1 don't make it to market because they either have off-target toxicity or they engage the target but without the effects that were expected, or other things happen along the way. So the hardest thing is just to show there is any benefit. Once you've done that, as you accrue information with larger numbers of people, I think we will be able to expand the aperture, because we're just entering the era now where I think we are much more confidently going to be able to use things like electronic health records and personal devices. We all have cell phones. I spent 5 years at Alphabet. I feel like, you know, the technology's been there for a while, and we're just developing now the rigor and standards of methods to be able to use these data for regulatory purposes. And that's going to open up the ability to do much larger trials. You know, it's just on a call with the India consortium, this US-India consortium, and it's a different angle, but it's the same general idea. Their question was, why don't you do the trials in India? And my answer was, if I lived in India, I would want a representative Indian population in clinical trials for drugs and devices that I was going to use, just like if I'm living in the US, I want a representative US population. So that means, and also increasingly, just to throw in another example that's in play right now, this is an interesting day for Alzheimer's, because Lilly press release came out, and Zan, you know that I'm obligated and duty bound to say we have to wait and see what the data shows, not just the press release. But if you assume that the data in the press release, which is highly likely going to look like the data is going to look like the press release, we'll have now a mountain of data about reduction in the rate of decline of cognitive function. But then there's a question of who should be treated. Is it everybody? Is it a particular subgroup based on amyloid or some other characteristic? We're now at the phase of technology where I feel like we shouldn't be using marketing to make those decisions. We ought to be generating evidence in the post-market phase. And that's not primarily in FDA's lane, but I think around the world, whether it's CMS in the United States or tech assessment in Europe, there's going to be a push to get much more evidence. And we used to say, well, it's impossible because it would be too expensive, but we got 320 million Americans with electronic health records. I think it's pretty hard to say it's not possible to do it.
So,
Well, you are an expert in big data. Sorry, Jay.
Yeah, but I was going to say that, you know, big data is great, but one also has to be sure that there is compliance with whatever intervention one is looking at. And perhaps big data can find that through through various kinds of sensors and apps. But you will recall, Rob, you were involved in the Excel trial where 41% of the people on the pragmatic trial, where 41% of the people on the tested agent discontinued. And that really complicated the interpretation of that. So how do we get around those things in a pragmatic and real world approach?
Well, Jay, because of my current position, I can't get into an argument about the Excel trial, but I actually think if you look back, came pretty close to the.
I agree. I count it as positive, even though
Yeah.
technically, yeah.
And if you look at like long-term statin trials or ACE inhibitor trials in cardiology, over time, people, for a whole variety of reasons, people discontinue the medication. Excel wasn't that different if you look at units of time as a metric. But having said that, I want to be clear that when I say pragmatic studies, I don't mean just taking observational data and trying to figure it out in hindsight. I'm really talking about, the word I've been using lately is evidence-ready systems. If we look at the UK with COVID compared to the US, the UK said, we got systems, we have electronic health records, we can ask a question. We don't have to collect much additional data because we got most of it in the EHR, but there is study-specific data. And one element of study-specific data is, did the person get the treatment that was assigned? And for a very low cost, they reeled out study after study that showed us what worked and what didn't.
Can you give me your last name and date of birth?
Meanwhile, in the US, the tendency was to do small studies that were not adequate to really answer the question because the cost per patient was so high. Now, I agree with the one point you made. When you get into chronic trials, it's harder because people move around, things happen. You can almost certainly do better with adherence with study medication if people are coming in seeing the study coordinator. So there's a trade-off there that we'll have to learn more about. But, I'm looking at things like gene editing is, just an amazing disease modifying approach to children with rare disease, but we won't know the impact of editing one gene on the sum of other genes until we got 20 or 30 years of follow-up for these diseases. So we're going to have to develop systems to measure things over time. And the only part of this I'm 100% sure of is the technology is not the limitation. It's the human factor that's the limitation.
Well, if you talk about wanting to have a healthy lifespan, that's going to be true for all these, that we need to have long-term follow-up because, it's not like testing a drug in rodents that have a short lifespan, but we're looking at human beings and saying we're going to expand the healthy lifespan, but you really need to follow them for their entire lifespan to know whether or not you achieve that. And so that is long-term follow-up, and you're going to need those kinds of large databases and sensors and medical records to be able to do that.
Couldn't agree more. And I mean, I know throughout the questions that you all sent me in advance that you were thinking about, this is underlying issue that we just got to come to grips with, which is, and I think we have in rare serious disease, where the question was, can you use accelerated approvals where there's more uncertainty by definition, and confirm and follow up. And the answer is, for at least in America, people have said, if I got a disease that's going to kill, if there's a disease that's going to kill my child before they're even 10 years old, I'm willing to take more risk in order to potentially get a benefit. But when you're talking about healthy people, we haven't come to grips with that yet. Like, how much, there's a question of how much uncertainty is reasonable for people to tolerate. I don't know, this gets me, your questions cause me to get philosophical, so I'll go ahead a bit and do it.
Please.
I mean, you're aware that my career is, my academic career was mostly doing late phase clinical trials. I had the fun of spending a lot of time on portfolio selection and trying to understand preclinical and early phase data. But the work I did was mostly large clinical trials. And, and so I saw so many things, and at 90% attrition rate, I was able to observe that happening. And every single one of those trials had some really smart group of scientists who were 100% sure that this darn thing was going to cure some disease or have an amazingly positive effect. Otherwise, you couldn't raise the money and get our IRBs to agree to phase 1. And so I think just having an expert's opinion that it's, they're sure it's going to work is not enough. And then you say, well, if we got to wait 30 years to find out, that's also not going to work, which is a point that I think we all agree on. And I just say, between those two extremes, for therapies intended to prevent deterioration, that discussion, I'm glad you're having it. I would just say it's unsettled. And I would also say it's unlikely that the FDA is going to be the primary instigator of a decision about where to draw that line. That's got to be an argument among experts in society and a whole variety of people. I'll also point out that, the Alzheimer's data begs the question, doesn't it? How early should you start if you're at risk? Right. Who knows? Because here's a treatment that definitely has risks.
Now, well, it brings up an interesting point, that if we're going to really move the needle in the field, we need gerosciences experts and regulatory science experts and policy experts, perhaps even from Congress, to get together and have some sort of dialogue and come up with a dedicated report that really lays the groundwork as to what directions we should be going. Would you buy that?
Sure. That's the American way. And I think, I wish I knew 30 years ago what I know about Congress now. Some of you did, but it is a system and you need to understand it to have an impact. But regardless of views, any cynicism about politicians, et cetera, it is a fact that if there's a consensus in the population, it's likely in a democracy like ours to eventually end up with Congress passing a law. And that's what happened with accelerated approval, as you know. It's also what caused Congress to add to the omnibus some new teeth for the FDA to sort of fix some of the things that weren't going right with accelerated approval.
Can we think about also getting Congress to change its approach for nutritional supplements, so that if they do a large-scale outcome trial, Cosmos enrolled 21,000 people. And although not the primary endpoint, they found a significant benefit for both cardiovascular death and for standard MACE. And yet they really can't do anything with that with the current rules. Could FDA, if with a little bit of push on to Congress, approve carefully done studies with supplement and nutritional products like that?
And Jay, just because even the commissioner may not know what Cosmos was or still is ongoing, we're talking about a large trial of a nutritional product, the flavanol extract. It's the largest trial you've never heard of. And just so Rob knows, we're talking about, in this case, a nutritional product. And this brings up, how do you have incentives on the food side for doing these kind of trials so that we do get the evidence?
Well, I did read your stuff and I went and found the trial. It's not published in the most widely read journal. I'll say that. Although it has a nice.
Well, they missed their primary endpoint, which was.
Yeah, and so I read it, and we could have a one discussion about what it means when you miss the primary endpoint and you hit a mortality endpoint. That's a really interesting topic, but I think I would sure agree that it's time to update the supplement legislation. It's very old. There's a lot of resistance to updating it. It's on our legislative agenda. That's publicly known. It didn't make it into the omnibus. There's some very prominent politicians that are opposed to any changes because, as you know, you can market a supplement now without any real notification of the FDA. There's no list of all the supplements that are sold and what's in them. There's no requirement for adverse event reporting, et cetera. And I think for foods in general, where I've spent the majority of my time, I think all of you have probably read about that this year. Part of the discussion we had about large trials, I actually think this Cosmos trial is in a way a groundbreaking thing because it was done by that Harvard group. My wife's been a participant in the Nurses' Health Study. They do things at a low cost. They focus on, they use a lot of the methods that I think are the way of the future. So I think for a lot of things that people believe about foods, it's going to be possible to put those to the test also. And we're going to need a regulatory framework to guide how people can promote those things. The simplest way I can say about my concern is if you can tell me what good for your prostate health actually means, I would, then I might accept that the way we handle supplements right now is the right way. I have no idea what that means, but it's all over a number of products. So these structure function claims, they're not interpretable in a health context. So, but for that law to change, it's going to take enough people agreeing with me, which right now there's not.
So one of the things I hear you saying and agreeing with us is that Kitalys or Connexum need to convene a group of gerosciences, include some regulatory people, some policy people, and come up with some sort of overlying document that would give direction of what might be desired in this space.
Someone should convene, and what my advice is, make sure that if there are prominent naysayers and legitimate disagreements, that those are accounted for. Because it's not a consensus if you have a group that anoints itself as a consensus group and then excludes people who have status in the field. And I recognize that can be difficult, but that's my only advice about it. And I used to, spend a lot of time convening groups like that, as I think I actually think it's kind of fun because you have really, when the question is, it's not just theoretical, you're going to apply it to something that might be a treatment. The discussion gets really interesting quickly.
Well, that's great advice, Rob. We definitely tend to work in our own silos and hear our own opinions being echoed and working with those folks. But we do need to hear a wide range of opinions.
So I think we've hit a few of the key things. One of them that we came close to when you were talking about big data and collecting those things is whether AI might have a role in all this in terms of looking at the data sets at least, or of coming up with directions to go in. What's your thoughts about AI in the future?
Well, again, taking into account that I worked at Alphabet for 5 years, and
I know, I visited you there.
I'm far from a technical expert, and I'm not a coder. I'm not a computer scientist. And in fact, most of my career has been working with people that are in that field and statistics to get clinical trials done. So I feel like a sort of intuitive sense of where things are headed. And the first thing to point out is AI is pretty much built into so many things we do already, and we just don't realize it because it's been installed into systems that we routinely use. Like if you're trying to figure out where you're going to drive, you're probably asking your phone or your car. And that's like one of the best examples of use of continuous AI you can possibly see, because it's adjusting your route in real time based on data coming in, and also its knowledge of your preferences, which accrue over time in the instrument. And I think the thing that's such a big and I think I give credit to things that were done at FDA when I wasn't here, with the general schema for how to regulate algorithms in AI, which is very focused on something that I saw in real time at Alphabet, which is no matter how good your algorithm is at point A, by the time you're 3 months down the road, if it's applied in real life, the operating characteristics of that algorithm are going to be different. And so you've got to measure the operating characteristics of the algorithm, which means in essence that you need a learning health system in place to make sure this doesn't go awry. Now, when we take large language models and generative AI, we get into an acceleration sphere that even, you probably saw that Hinton retired from Google, not because he was scared of what Google was doing, but he felt he needed to speak out, and he didn't want his opinions to be conflated with opinions about Google specifically. But generative AI is an amazing, it is the big game changer that we've been waiting on, is what I would say. But it also has a real risk of getting out of control in a way that none of us will understand. And so we're like a lot of people having to think about what we will do to regulate this. I don't see AI replacing clinical trials, because I think causal inference is still just a very difficult problem. I see it making clinical trials easier and easier to do, modeling clinical trials so you can do the right clinical trial will be better. And, some of the greatest is just going to be like doctors may actually be able to talk with patients now, because they won't have to be copying and pasting all their notes. It can be generated using large language model, and doctor can just check it, which is one of the biggest problems we have, and also one of our biggest problems in clinical trials. If you survey practicing clinicians now, they're under so much pressure to complete their charting that they don't have time to talk to patients about risks and benefits of new potential treatments. So I'm really excited about it, you can tell, but we need to be wary of the risk involved in this new generation of AI, which is, I sort of saw it happening 5 years ago, and it's amazing how quickly it's coming into play now.
Indeed. Since everything here that we're talking about, if we're going to be successful, is cross-disciplinary, are there other federal agents who should be involved in developing the consensus documents that we mentioned? And, you know, for example, the FTC might have authority on what supplement companies say. The other agencies, you mentioned CMS earlier, you know, in diabetes, we have a trans government task force for type 1 diabetes, which covers that, which includes FDA, CDC, CMS, as well as several NIH institutes. Is that kind of cross-government activity potentially going to be an approach that we could use to help in generating a consensus statement and where we ought to go and how we approach Congress?
Yeah, I would say, I would take it for granted that if you're going to have a consensus, it's going to be persuasive. You got to have CMS and NIH and probably CDC. I mean, CDC is less generally involved in therapeutic interventions, but you're talking about prevention where CDC has a major role. You know, thoughts about FTC are interesting. More and more aware of FTC. Yeah, I think there's sort of a core group of trusted entities that need to be on board. I mean, one other thing I'd say, in addition to being inclusive, I think you'll find that sometimes the best way to proceed is to really clearly identify where there are differences of opinion so that you can, over the course of some reasonable period of time, resolve those differences or come to some consensus. But having the other federal agencies involved, I think, is really important. You're aware that the nomination for NIH director has not been made yet, but there's certainly intimations that it may be someone who's very involved in clinical research and clinical trials. So there may be a real opportunity here for collaboration on a broad front.
Indeed, her
Probably.
is cancer, and cancer clearly is one of the things in aging that we need to think about, different than some of the other chronic diseases because there's so many different cancers, but obviously needs to be considered. Zan, I think we're at the time that we said we would have Thomas.
Well, that's right. We allotted 15 minutes for Q&A, and we will start with our panel, which we've assembled. We've got a diversity of experts, and we even have a professional journalist, Kate Rawson, who co-founded the Pink Sheet. We'll give her the first question for Rob.
Thanks everybody so much. Zan, I would be about 100 years old if I had co-founded the Pink Sheet. So, but I did help launch the Pink Sheet Daily. So thank you.
Sorry for
that. No, the Pink Sheet was founded in 1939, and I now work in provision policy, but contribute to the Pink Sheet. So, and I know Sarah Carlin Smith is on here as well. So good to see her name here. Commissioner, it's always great to see you. This is a really interesting topic, and one that, you know, we haven't really delved into at provision policy that much. So really happy to be here and learn some things about Healthspan products. So I guess my question would be, you know, what is, I hear what you're saying about the terms of, you know, in terms of the importance of outside convening, that this is something that the Connexums, maybe the Duke Margolises or the National Academies need to sort of work out. But I wonder if it's also an opportunity for FDA to get involved. And where do you see the agency's participation and, you know, as a first step?
Well, I would just say wherever there's scientific discussion and policy discussion about medical interventions, the FDA is and should be involved. But I don't think FDA should be leading a field of science. I think the best view of the FDA is that we're referees, and we have opinions. And it's good for FDA scientists to stay abreast and to be involved in the opinions. But I think there's a reason that we have an NIH and that we have a vibrant industry that invents and tries new things. And that's where the push should come. There, you know, there's one special area where I think FDA should lead when there's a clear pathway. And I would just point to Rick Pazder as a shining example of that. But, you know, Rick was not inventing the drugs or inventing the scientific paradigms, but he was looking at where the field was headed and providing runways that you could say enabled industry or helped industry go down a pathway that has been very successful. That's a particular area for FDA. But what you're talking about, you know, FDA should participate, but you know, we're not here to be a research science organization. We do research, as you all know, but it's really regulatory science, not discovery science.
If I could just add one on follow on, and then I'll mute myself. So we have some industry folks and drug sponsors on this call. If I'm a company that's interested in this field, how do I get started? Who do I reach out to at FDA to make sure that, you know, if I'm thinking about trials or endpoints, who's my best person for that kind of expertise at the agency?
It so much depends on what the product is that you're dealing with. And if you know, you brought up supplements. If it's a supplement, then you know, we're going to have to invent something new to deal with it for this, because there's not a pathway for what you described, as you pointed out. But you know, if it's a biologic or a drug, you'd have to ask the question, you know, what is it primarily oriented to do? And I'd just go to that part of the FDA. I mean, I think most companies know where to go with that. But
On
when
that point, Rob, it's almost inherent in this field that if it's truly a geroscience intervention, it would hit across multiple therapeutic areas. So the question comes up, should there be a division or even an office at FDA that would take care of these approaches, as well as age-related standard indications like frailty, cachexia, and related metabolic conditions?
Well, it's a hope of mine, Zan, that we'll develop an approach to aging, not for this part of it so much, I'll come back to that, but more, I mean, right now, if you said, what's the right dose of a drug for a 90-year-old person in general, I don't think we have much evidence to guide us right now. And it reminds me of, I was very involved in the pediatric rule and all that work, which I think has been, you know, pretty successful. Still some more to be done. I think we do need to focus on aging more. I was part of right before being nominated, I was part of a group that was advising the FDA, and we wrote a paper on it. So I've got a written record on this. For what you're describing, I don't think the time is right yet to allocate those kind of resources, but I think as the field evolves, it's a possibility.
Steve Austed is the scientific director of the American Federation of Aging Research and an expert scientifically and in other ways. I'm going to bring Stephen up for a question.
Sure. Thank you. I think the pathway for certain types of, let's call them anti-aging drugs, just drugs that presumably are targeting fundamental aging processes. In terms of addressing specific diseases, I think the pathways are pretty clear. What's unclear to us in the field is there a way to prove drugs to give perfectly healthy people, so far as we can tell, to slow their progression? It's almost like, who do you give the Alzheimer's? Let's assume we have an Alzheimer's drug. Does everybody get it? Does somebody, only people with MCI? And how do we define MCI? So do you see any way to think about drugs that actually are not directed at specific diseases and would have outcomes that are not directly related to specific diseases or disabilities?
That's such a, I mean, you know, I've been in many discussions about that. Remember that Calico was a branch of Alphabet, and I spent a lot of time talking to Hal Barron when he was there. And I don't have any particular wisdom on this. It hurts my head to think about it. You know, we need, if people think that there's going to be a drug that will reduce aging without affecting any particular disease any more than any other, we're going to have to come up with some way to deal with that. I don't have a magic potion for that right now. We do have something called the National Institutes of Aging. I spent 3 years on the council of that organization. And, you know, like I say, I think FDA NIH collaboration is going to be a big part of whatever happens in this field.
Thank you.
We have another very well-known expert in the neuroscience field, Dr. Nir Barzilay, who I hope can come off mute and ask a question. And Nir, if you're not able to do that immediately, we'll come back to you. I'd like to ask a professional drug developer, Dr. Joan Manning, who has probably taken an agent as far as anybody else in the field of neuroscience, in her case, aiming at reducing the risk of upper respiratory infection. But Joan, how about a question from you?
Sure. So I was really interested in the comment about evidence-ready systems that were available in the UK, but not in the US during the COVID pandemic. Do we now have those systems available? Because part of the problem when we try to do trials, geroscience trials, where we're usually trying to prevent something, we need these huge, expensive trials and the costs are formidable. But if we could decrease the cost, as you suggest, are the systems in place? And two, lots of times the FDA wants a lot of safety monitoring, which becomes tricky because you keep on having to either go to the homes and get blood or bring people into sites, which adds to the expense. Is there any shift in how people are being monitored in trials within the FDA?
Well, so there's not such an evidence-ready system now. That's a goal. And I was trying to get across that if we end up with an NIH director who's interested in this, and I know there's interest at CMS for the reasons that, you know, we've discussed, there's a possibility that, you know, and now with the technology where it is, this is something I wanted to do my whole career. So I'm hoping that we'll develop such a system in the United States. I mean, another thing to keep in mind, I mean, the way I say it often is for COVID treatment, the UK set the pace. We all know that with the recovery trials. But when we wanted to know what to do with the next dose of vaccine, we called Israel because they have just in time electronic health record data on the whole population, essentially. that's kept up to date, and they add extra things to it if needed, but the minimal amount necessary so that it's within a cost range. Now, I'd have to say, if you got a novel molecule that you're going to give to human beings on a large scale, the early part of it, the first X number of patients, whatever X is, there can be a healthy discussion about that. I don't see that changing because you don't know what's going to happen. If there's anything I'm 100% sure of, is that Mother Nature is a lot smarter than we are. Just ask any drug developer who's, been through the mill. But I think the difference is, for whatever reason, we've tended to say for the next 50,000 people, you still got to collect everything and get all those blood tests. And I think that's where we can use things like artificial intelligence and technology to do things remotely and not, this is old, Zan, you were part of these discussions way back. If you've measured, how often people get hiccups in 1,500 people, and it looks like the general rate of hiccuping in the general population, you really don't need to measure hiccups anymore. But you need to look for rare events that can happen, once in 10,000 people that may turn out to be important.
Yeah.
So,
So true.
there are ways that we can, there's so many ways we can reduce the cost to make these studies possible, but I don't see it changing in the early phase. We actually need to do all that stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm wondering, Zan, that is in part of this group initiative that supporting the evidence-ready systems, and like in the phase 3, after you've established safety profiles, having less monitoring so that it's feasible to do these Healthspan trials with prevention endpoints. It would be a nice thing to get consensus on.
Yeah. The large, pragmatic, well-controlled trial.
Commissioner, Commissioner, I'm interested in the issue of NIH FDA coordination here, because there's a risk, as there have been in other fields, where NIH is funding research that makes perfectly good sense, but is completely unaligned with what will be needed in the regulatory process. And in this area where it's all over the place to begin with, is that something FDA would participate in if there was a conference on that? Is there somebody who could be appointed, a point person who could respond to these kind of inquiries? Because we can't call you every time. I know that.
I think there's always going to be interested. I never had trouble getting FDA people to come to meetings that I had, so I'm sure you could find the same thing. And it is a hard question to know which person would be best, but we've got some, I think the medical policy office at FDA right now is first rate in my view, and they'd probably be the place to go for general discussions about policies that are not yet baked.
Chief Medical Officer.
And we got a great chief medical officer, Hillary Marston, who is new and a phenomenal internist, who also worked closely with Tony Fauci for some years, and then in the Domestic Policy Council. So she knows all these she knows a lot more about the federal ropes than I do. I'd also recommend our chief science officer, Namanje Bumpus, who gave up an endowed professorship at Hopkins, was a department chair of pharmacology, to become the CSO at FDA. And she is a phenomenal person. So I feel like we got an arsenal of great people who can think very broadly and also deeply about the science and clinical issues. But I'll grant you, it's, we got 19,000 people, so you got to think about who you engage on what topic.
We'll tell them that you sent us, Rob. and we ask for their participation. Well, there's so many questions in the chat. We would love to get to all of the questions, but I know that you're going to have to run in a minute, Rob. I wonder, though, Rob, do you have any other sort of closing thoughts that you would like to say?
As you might imagine right now, my, well, to be completely transparent, we have the pandemic preparedness hearing with the Senate tomorrow. So that's what I'm mostly thinking about. You guys are second in my thoughts right at this moment. But in terms of your interest, I think that this new class of Alzheimer's drugs, again, I want to be perfectly clear. As you know, Zan, sometimes the press releases and the data, when you see the actual data, turn out to be different. I don't think that's going to be the case here, but we'll see. So with that caveat, that is going to raise a huge number of questions, which I think are closely related to what you're talking about. I mean, if I had a family history of early Alzheimer's and I was not yet affected, I would be asking the question, should I be starting this? And of course, we don't know because the trials haven't asked that question. So they're going to be addressing, I think, some of the things that you're raising. And as you well know, I think the obesity drugs are going to be the other area, which has, the first big obesity without diabetes outcome trial is going to report out soon. And it's going to raise a lot of the same kind of questions. And as far as I know, the mechanisms there are very complicated. So we could say we sort of know the systems that are involved. We don't really know how the mechanisms play out, but it seems to be a general effect on a lot of things that are impacting chronic disease. So it's a fertile time to be talking about this, and I'm glad you're doing it.
Well, Rob, we can't thank you enough for spending this time, particularly on the eve of a big hearing for you. And gosh, you've got so many issues swirling around, and we admire what you're doing. It's great to have you spend some time with us. We have a lot of people who are going to hang on. We'll keep the discussion going, but you gave us great food for thought. And again, we thank you so much.
Thanks a bunch. Have a good rest of the meeting.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
So
Well,
Zan,
folks, please, Jay, go right ahead.
In his last comment, Rob raised the issue of basically the GLP-1s and their spinoffs that are being looked at for obesity. They've already been shown to work in type 2 diabetes, but one should point out they're being studied for nutritional liver disease, NASH and NAFLD. They're being studied for neuroprotection and neurodegenerative disorders. They're being looked at across the board for so many of the things that contribute to aging, and they may be the first shot on goal that we have of things that it may take multiple approvals that would get through for a potential anti-aging approach.
Yeah, well, Jay, as you know better than anybody else, because you were right in the middle of it. The first GLP-1 agonist was approved back in the early 2000s. Now
April 28th, 2005, 18 years ago last week.
Well, there
and
you
I've
go.
been on one ever since.
Yeah, well, but we've been 20 years since then, and we've added CV and weight loss indications.
Right.
But it's taken us that long to get to what could be a kind of multi-morbidity global indication.
Yeah, but we've got Neer on the line, and he's doing the TAME study, or leading it, which tries to look at multiple chronic diseases simultaneously. And the question is, can you get approval if you just stop one of those? Do you need to stop several of them? How long do the trials need to last before you can really get a regulatory decision. I don't know, Neri, I see we're now seeing you on your iPhone, so welcome. Maybe you'd like to comment.
Yeah, Nir,
Yeah.
we tried to bring you on earlier, but go right ahead.
Well, I heard you. I didn't know that there's a plan for asking question, and I was dumbfounded by the fact that Steve asked question caused him headache, and there's nothing I could do than increasing his headache. And in fact, I wish retrospect, we could have starting by presenting rationale for a tank trial and then asking him to say something, because obviously he's not educated in geroscience like us. And so I wish we could have used it better. But if you would come back to me, I would maybe try to ask it differently. There are several drugs. The GLP-1 was mentioned, metformin, SGLT2 inhibitors, who are target for one disease, but when you give them to animal, they live longer. When you give them to humans, they affect cardiac, kidney outcomes, overall mortality. So maybe to think of of studies where we can repurpose a drug for an endpoint that Steve Krichevsky will talk about later, I'm sure. But that would be my question. And I don't think he really got the fact that we're talking about prevention and it's better to prevent those, sarcopenia and frailty and all that are terrific, except we actually want to prevent them. It's much harder to treat them. So this would be the points of discussion, I think, that we kind of missed, but let's get better with time.
Yeah. Well, it is a lot to take in. And to be fair to Rob, I think he does understand that we are looking for deep roots that drive these multiple chronic diseases and the aging process in general. But he's being pragmatic and saying you've got to have evidence that the product works, and we don't know how to call that yet. So that's a big challenge for him.
Yeah, this is Mark Mattson. It's not surprising that a drug like the GLP-1 agonists were actually developed at NIA when I was there. Josephine Egan and Nigel Gregg took the lead in developing these for neurodegenerative disorders and collaborated with Tim Foltini on the Parkinson's trial. But if a drug improves insulin sensitivity and reduces obesity, it's going to extend lifespan, assuming there's no long-term bad side effects, because we know that obesity and insulin resistance shorten lifespan. And the animal studies, the control animals, are unhealthy in the sense that they're overfed and they don't get any exercise. And so their lifespan is presumably less than it would be in the wild, assuming they didn't get killed by a predator. So I think that, and this is a general, you're talking about kind of a targeting aging, pan-aging things that affect all organ systems. And one thing, you had such short time with the FDA commissioner, but biomarkers is kind of still the key thing in the aging field. Are there clear biomarkers of aging that can be reliably measured and have been established, to be a
Well,
readout?
thank you, Mark. We do want to go back to biomarkers in just a moment. That's
Okay.
a really hot area and very important. But first, let's have Steve Krichevsky, who is a preeminent biostatistician and has been very much involved in this neuroscience field and done a lot of deep thinking. Perhaps he could take Nir's remarks and maybe incorporate some of your own thoughts, Mark. But Steve, talk a little bit about the concept of a multimorbidity composite endpoint.
Sure, and thank you for the promotion of biostatistician. I'm really trained as an epidemiologist, but notwithstanding. Yeah, so when we started thinking about the TAME trial, convened quite a big group to try to talk through an endpoint for any kind of intervention that slows aging, with the mind that it should be something that the FDA would also be interested in. And so in our conversation with them many years ago, they would not recognize or didn't thought aging per se was a philosophical issue and not something regular something that they were that interested in, but a composite of clinical endpoints was very much very much in game, and very viable as a way forward. So we started modeling that as a potential endpoint, and our design for TAME represents our thinking on that, and that is you need about 3,000 people for about 5 years to see a 20% difference in the emergence of new multimorbidities from a list of 5. Now that endpoint is actually a subset of a number of potential indices that are made up of many more kinds of endpoints than the 5 or 6 entities that figured in the TAME endpoint. And so we're also working on those in the hopes that it would require somewhat less people, but FDA's interest in it is less clear because it is a mixture of things that are clearly clinical, yes, no kinds of situations, and some functional ones as well. But this is a really important discussion to have, because if we don't know what an endpoint is for the trial we're going to do, we don't know how to tune our biomarkers to predict it, and we don't know what biomarkers to include in our studies to see if they could serve as surrogate biomarkers. So these are sort of a knot of considerations, a knot of things are all tied up together, and they can't, and so the answer to one unlocks several of the others. So we cannot have a validated surrogate outcome biomarker until we know what the outcome is. So that's all.
Well, on that point, it's so important. A lot of progress is being made in developing biomarkers.
Yeah.
And we have biologic clocks that are very well correlated with aging and clinical outcomes. But as you say, and you make the key distinction, they've not been validated against a change effected by an intervention. That's the big holdup. That's the big challenge of developing biomarkers for use of surrogate endpoints.
Yeah, you need to.
Could I just say something here?
Yeah,
Because
Stephen, go.
when we went to the FDA about the TAME trial, I think we were pretty successful at convincing them that we could do a trial that would tell us something about preventing multiple diseases. The much tougher question, we were purposely choosing people that were not very healthy for that trial. That was the whole goal. We were thinking, God, what would happen if we got a bunch of health nuts in the trial? It would destroy everything. But in fact, what we really want to do is we really want to preserve health. So ultimately, we're going to have to find a way to address people, not that are obese or already have lots and lots of risk factors, but people who are also quite healthy but want to stay that way. And that just seems to me like a really tough nut to crack.
Well, that's right. And just from the standpoint of event rate in a healthy population, it's going to be very hard to move the needle.
I was just going to say, but that gets to his evidence-ready system and
That's right.
decreasing the burden of those late-stage huge trials. I mean, I really do think that's at the center, when you think about it, of what's stopping us from being able to move forward in a Healthspan disease prevention indication in healthies is decreasing cost of trials. So it's like major to be able to push for that. And since Rob's already seems on board with that, that seems like a politically good torch for us to start caring. I don't know what the right phrase is.
Carry the banner forward.
Yeah.
The history of hypertension and hypercholesterolemia has been the first trial of a cholestyramine, wherein people in the men only in the 95th percentile of LDL. And once that happened, as new and better treatments got discovered, what became treatable kept lowering and lowering and lowering. Same with hypertension. The definition of it went from 160 back in the in the 50s, incredibly high levels, and as treatments became safer and better, what was hypertensive got redefined down. Now it's probably 60% of the U.S. population qualifies for treatment. So I think if we had something that worked in the in a high risk population over time, that would work down through the population to cover more and more people. But you can't do the efficacy trial on average people because you couldn't afford to do it.
Not with conventional trials.
Right.
Go ahead,
Not with
Jay.
conventional trials.
So Steve, that raises an interesting sidelight issue. We in the 1970s, we had up till early 1972, we in the United States used the World Health Organization definition of hypertension of 160/95.
Mm-hmm.
In 1972, the US alone, without the rest of the world, changed to 140/90.
Mm-hmm.
And the overall cardiovascular death rate declined in the US over the next 10 years and not in any other country, showing that was really wise. And the reason that it became so effective was we had the National High Blood Pressure Education Program, where people went into churches and schools and all the time to know your number for your blood pressure and to really get people on board to do those things. Maybe as we talk about aging things, we need to think also about the communication strategy for how we bring it out to get everyone involved so that they really are interested in seeing products that will create a more healthy lifespan, or really paying attention to keeping your physical activity, your mental activity, and your diet in line so that you can do it with lifestyle issues.
Well, and again, it relates back to the point the commissioner made, and then Joan, in effect, seconded. We need systems that are ready to effect these kind of results, whether it be a clinical trial that can answer the question, or whether it be implementing the use of the scientific knowledge we know that will improve health. I want to back up a little bit to bring in Dave Fox, who's thought deeply about the regulatory structure and function in facing healthy longevity products, along with Steve Grossman, who was involved in developing the Orphan Drug Act. And we could imagine that there could be such an act that would facilitate or incentivize the development of products for achieving healthy longevity. David and Steve, you were at respectively the FDA and the Department of Health and Human Services in very key positions. So you've thought about this. How do you see the differences between developing therapies for disease and actually preventing, or we should say reducing, risk of chronic diseases, and in general, slowing the aging process?
Well, thanks, Dan. I think Jay's last comment really was an eye opener. It really puts his finger on it. So if I understand that, so the public health community in the U.S. made an adjustment to the goal, to the target, not knowing necessarily that it would have an effect. but then validated afterwards through actual experience that it significantly reduced death rates. So the public health community looked at some metric that they thought was reasonably likely to have a positive impact, but they didn't have the data. But they went ahead in the face of uncertainty. Not true, you know, not naked uncertainty. I mean, there was, and the commissioner talked about consensus among experts sitting around a table, but looked at the metric and thought we can do better. And if we do better, people might live longer or be healthier. And they were right. And I thought it was very interesting. The commissioner started his presentation out talking about uncertainty and accelerated approval and how we tolerate a high level of uncertainty when the outcome is so immediate and so dire. And I think really that it all really comes down to whether we can encourage the regulators in the absence of congressional action to also allow for a degree of uncertainty in another area where people have an interest, which is in living longer, healthier lives. And you know, and also, you know, who is the guardian of that decision? Is it the staff at FDA? And the commissioner admitted he has no control over the staff at FDA. Is the commissioner's office, or is it, you know, is it the community at large?
Well, in terms of who, he answered the question. If we go to the chief scientist and the chief medical officer and say he sent us, we've got our entree point.
Yeah.
I was more taken with his initial comments about you need to have it really well thought out before, and with some evidence before FDA is going to engage in path making. And you know, this is still a problem because I don't think people know where we need to get to. So what was I taught? That, you know, when you don't know where you're going, any path will do. And there is much of that in the field that needs to be conquered. It should be conquered in concert, in conversation with FDA and NIH, but we need to be bringing it to them to a degree self-packaged. And I thought that's what I heard him say, and I think it's right. We need our path. They are going to tell us.
Okay, Saima Khan will take your question.
Hi there, Dr. Fleming. Thank you for that, and also for pronouncing my name beautifully. Yeah, so I'm just from the regulatory angle, a little bit not surprised, but a bit disappointed with the approach that the FDA's hands are tied and we need consensus from the clinical community and you guys lead the way on technology. It's the same rhetoric we use and hear, and it's a little bit passive. So we've learned so much in the space of all of the diseases that you covered here, cardiovascular, metabolic, Alzheimer's, etc., neurodegenerative, and we know that there are certain interventions that the majority of responders will benefit from, and we've taken risks. We've had big cohorts of data from Framingham studies to other large trials that have helped us to qualify that the risk or the uncertainty was worth taking, and that you can make a treatment or a pharmacological or a diet and exercise intervention based on risk factors. We also seem to be in this inertia for decades around cardiometabolic disease and the metabolic syndrome. And we know full well that there is a relationship and a correlation between metabolic health, neuroprotection, sorry. And so I think certainly from my point of view, I think we should continue to request the FDA to invest in pathways that will enable elderly drug development, geriatric drug development. And we might have to bucket this. It might have to be, there's lower hanging fruit, there is broader implications and longer term, earlier intervention and access issues. But it doesn't mean that you just don't do anything. So if we take it by disease state, and I think one of the questions was around where do we go, who do we contact? And it was very much, well, you know, you pick a disease and you pick a division. But there are so many good examples in the FDA where, for example, centers of excellence or accelerating certain technologies and disease types looking at different pathways, even maybe if we look at the pediatric regulation and how that came about, is there something that we could be pushing the FDA to do in terms of having an above division approach to certain conditions that we know either there's a clinical pharmacology, there's a disease prevalence, there is a bigger clinical consensus around certain biomarkers, and take it in that multi-pronged approach to get them to sit at the table and be less didactic about disease A and disease B and, you know, endpoint this and acceleration that. So sorry to wax on a bit, but I do feel as though we need to continue that pressure, keep asking that, and that the consensus and partnership with the FDA should be in parallel to the FDA taking a slightly different lens to how they are treating this population. And it's not just about healthy living, it's really about addressing high morbidity and mortality issues that we have with a population that is either defined as elderly or over the age of 65 or whatever WHO cutoff that you want. So sorry to sound quite passionate about it, but I'd like the
Well, Sana, we will sign you up. Great to
Oh,
hear from you.
Thank you. So I will keep, thank you.
Please stay in close touch. And Carl Pledger, I see you've got your hand up. We'll come right back to you. But since Simon mentioned what FDA should be doing, I don't think we should be too parochial. There are other major regulatory authorities in the world. I don't see anybody from MHRA or EMA on the call. I may be missing it, but Tina Woods in London. What do you know about what MHRA is doing in this regard? Can you bring any light to the MHRA approach, if there is one? You've done wonderful things in other sectors in Britain, but great to see you, and tell us what's going on there.
Great to be here and to be part of this fascinating discussion. So yes, I mean, there's quite a lot on the cards from a regulatory perspective in the UK. I mean, coming out of Brexit, there's a huge plan and linked to our science and tech ambitions, you know, to become a superpower, etc. So there's quite a lot of items sort of being looked at and actually being passed through legislation at the moment, right from sort of looking at personal data marketplaces and looking at creating a more effective digital market. We're looking at digital clinical trials. One of the 7 health challenges in the life sciences strategy is actually on the biology of aging. And in fact, a call that we had last week at the Office for Life Sciences, they're very, very keen on looking at aging biomarkers, you know, in clinical trials. So we're having ongoing discussions around that. And of course, linking it up with other sort of reforms in finance, for example, pension funds being able to invest in more high risk sort of innovation areas. So there's and the MHRA, of course, are revisiting sort of device regulation. And so what we're interested in is linking up the science and the technology with the possibilities to unlock innovation and sharing data at scale to really fuel our ambitions to achieve, you know, increases in healthy life expectancy, minimizing health and well-being inequalities, all linked to the government manifesto commitment, which is very much at the heart of policy making, and also linking up to some of the innovation clusters that we're trying to unveil around the UK in sort of more deprived areas. So it's all trying to join everything up around the possibilities of science, technology, linking health and wealth, and so forth. So there's quite a lot. I mean, it's a really interesting time, and we've just launched a Healthy Longevity Innovation Mission and speaking to colleagues around the world. In fact, this was on a call before this one, meeting some people out at the Foresight meeting last week in San Francisco, and, you know, trying to sort of galvanize attention, seeing the UK sort of ripe to become a sort of so-called world testbed for health. So I'll be reaching out to many of you on this call and very interested in sort of looking at the possibilities in the UK situation and teaming up with what's happening in the US. And I know, Zan, we've been having, with Thomas, we've been having lots of conversations about learning from each other, which will continue. And I think it's a really interesting time right now to look at all this, certainly in the UK context, which is, you know, ripe for lots of possibilities.
Pina, thank you for that wonderful summary. You've actually taught us more than we've taught you, for sure. The UK really is leading the world in its national policy formation and action, and largely in part to you and the all-party members who have really gotten behind this.
Well, there's a
across the
huge community
political
behind
spectrum.
us, which we've been growing substantially. So, I take my hats off to many, many people who have been sort of committed to the cause.
Well, thank you so much, and we will keep working together. Let me now go to Carl Pleasure, who's 8 time zones away in San Francisco. I know, Carl, you'll have a point about biomarkers.
No, I want to ask the question that I asked in the chat, which was never really directed at the commissioner. It was more directed at the rest of the community here. There's a lot of argument about whether aging should be considered a disease. And I think as a practical point of view, the better way forward is to look at the subparts of aging, because we know that it consists of a bunch of different molecular pathologies. And I think that many of those, if you look at them, look like they should be considered to be diseases. So, I'm not an expert on how things get classified as diseases, but I want to know whose job is it in the community, in the field, to work on this. So, for example, accumulation of persistent long-lived senescent cells. Everybody thinks this is hugely causally influencing a lot of different important health endpoints. And, just like cancer cells are, accumulation of cancer cells is bad, accumulation of senescent cells is, you cannot reasonably be considered to be disease. It seems like it can. Fatty thymus disease, right? The thymus involutes, and everybody knows that it is important for immunity and T cells and lots of clinical outcomes. And just like we have fatty liver disease, it seems like the analogous disease is for the thymus should be a clinical indication itself. So who should be making that case? Who in the field should be pushing that, and how?
I have to push back a little on that premise, Carl. There's a difference between cancer cells, which we know will kill you, and senescent cells, which we have good reason to believe are harmful. And yet we don't know exactly what will happen when we get rid of the senescent cells, or there may be off-target effects in doing so. So I take your point that there is a kind of continuum.
The bar for off-target effects is pretty broad if the analogy is chemotherapy.
Well, again, it's matching the problem with the solution. For a life-threatening disease, you have to be willing to take more drastic measures. But here's the essence of the problem. We're talking about preempting disease with a healthy population, where you have a very different benefit-risk consideration. That's the real challenge. It's not that it's right or wrong. It's just a statement of fact, but you can't
Some
take.
people who have fatty liver seem healthy, apparently, but we know they're not really. The same thing is true of thymic involution. There's no such thing as a healthy 60-year-old with whose
People
thymus
with fatty liver disease die mostly of cardiovascular disease. And so it's not necessarily the liver disease that kills them. It's complicated. I would say that you should treat everybody who has fatty liver disease with a drug that has a dicey safety profile. It's probably not true. But thank you, Carl. You surprised me. I thought we were going to talk about biomarkers. I would like to have our panel turn to biomarkers, and that is a hot topic, one that is so important to developing therapies sooner than, or intervention sooner than later, or preempting chronic disease. So let's start with Stephen Ostad, who is certainly in the thick of this area of endeavor.
Yeah. So I mean, it's clearly at the top of the list, I would say, of basically aspirations in the field, is to get a panel, or in the best case, a single biomarker that can track the rate of aging. we have some candidates. The trouble is, how do you validate them? It's not the same as validating a cancer biomarker. But again, I think there's a lot of effort. AFAR has got a major initiative to try to develop biomarkers, but tons of people are working on them. You know, I'm sure that Altos Labs is working on them. I'm sure that Calico is working on them. But it's the number one thing that we're missing, that we really need to develop. But unlike, you know, the NIH put $100 million into developing biomarkers 20 years ago and came up with nothing. But in fact, they didn't have the tools that we do now. And I'm quite convinced that we'll be successful. But right now, if I had to say there's the number one thing that we want to throw money at to figure out everything else about aging, it's going to be biomarkers, because that would accelerate the pace so much.
Well, back to Stephen Krzyzewski, who really understands the challenge on the practical level of validating biomarkers against clinical outcomes. Can you walk us through that, Steve?
Yeah, I will. I just mentioned that there is guidance from a joint NIH FDA working group that delineates 7 different uses of the word biomarker. And I think it's relevant here because I'm not sure when anyone says that word on this call, it's the same thing that someone else is hearing when they're on this call. The biomarkers that is the holy grail are surrogate endpoint biomarkers. So these are things you could measure quickly after an intervention that would give you a reliable readout of whether or not that intervention was likely or was going to have a benefit for whatever clinical outcome it's tuned to. And so we don't have those in this in this field, because we don't really have an intervention that is shown to be proven effective. And we need that first. Now, one step back from that are what are called sort of reasonable surrogates, or reasonably likely surrogates. And you need a couple of things for that. One is it has to predict the outcome, and your intervention has to change it. So the intervention you're proposing deflects it, and high and low values of that predict the outcome that you're trying to affect. But you still have to do the whole study to validate it completely. But it is a place to get started. And we went through that exercise in TAME, and there's a paper applying those criteria, and there's a paper by Jamie Justice that shows the result of that activity. And it is a framework. We're not saying those are the only potential biomarkers. Is there going to be one biomarker? Probably not. It's probably going to end up having to be an index. It's complicated by the fact that different organs may age at different rates, that there is not necessarily unitary aging across every aspect of us. And so that would also push you towards some kind of a composite or index. But we've got a ways to go. So there's a lot of promise. I do come back to a point I made earlier. It'd be really nice to know what the endpoint of the clinical trial it is that we want the surrogate for, so we can start looking for biomarkers related to that, and are trying to start a process to develop some consensus among clinical trialists, at least, of what some elements of that endpoint might be. So,
thanks, Steve. And Joan, you were on the bleeding edge of developing a surrogate sort of as you were flying the plane, and you had some gears switched by FDA on you. Walk us through how you were dealing with this issue and what it came down to.
Yeah, I would say we could always see that mTOR inhibitors upregulated antiviral gene response, and what we wanted as an endpoint, so I'm not sure this was a biomarker issue, was lab confirmed viral respiratory tract infections. And it just happened, the FDA, this was pre-COVID, wouldn't let us do nasopharyngeal swabs because they said no one in the real world got a nasopharyngeal swab when they got a respiratory tract infection. So we had to just use symptoms as an endpoint that were really noisy and we missed the endpoint. But I do go back to what Steve was saying. I'm not sure the problem is we don't have biomarkers. I think what we're really missing in the field is an endpoint to validate the biomarkers against, which was what Steve was getting. So we're stuck being unable to validate surrogate biomarkers right now. So the clinical is what's holding us back. We need more successful trials really showing that we are moving aging related conditions and either preventing or treating, that then we can use the biomarkers to see if they're correlating.
No, the question becomes how do you validate an endpoint, which is a very tricky business. From talking to the FDA in previous situations, I can say what they informally said, we would like to see more than one clinical trial, group of clinical trials enrolling more than 100,000 patients before we validate an endpoint, which is clearly impractical in aging. So there needs to be another path. And I'm wondering if, we do have this spectacular technology with artificial intelligence, and I'm wondering if there are databases that follow people over longer periods of time. There's probably a number. If we could actually download a number of databases into a program and have them pieced through artificial intelligence. And I don't think it's going to be industry that does that. I think that it's going to have to be academia or some of us here on this call that take that. Zan, are you aware of a number of these databases that might be used in that kind of way?
To some extent, and I can agree more that we need to put them to work. But again, it comes back to Steve Krzyzewski's point that ultimately you can generate a biomarker, a biologic clock, for example, has excellent correlation with aging or some particular clinical outcome. But validating that it moved in the same direction in response to an effective therapy, that's the big challenge.
Well, they're going to have to, but they'll have to go to a different model here. Ultimately, I think even Rob understood that.
Could I just jump in, Todd? There's a difference between validating the endpoint and validating the biomarker. So we could use validated endpoints in a clinical trial, targeting aging, to validate the biomarker as a first step.
No, I mean biomarkers. Biomarkers is what needs to be validated in that way. An endpoint is anything that affects how a patient feels or survives. Or
exactly.
functions.
Right.
And perhaps Stephen Ostedt, you could tell us what the FAR is doing specifically about working with industry who has large outcome trials.
Yes, well,
could be putting those data.
Well, what we're trying to do is exactly what's been described, which is compile enough studies and enough data already, and with enough collected samples already that we can go back and retrospectively do this. And one of the things that I think we're really lacking, and maybe something that this group could help out on, is I think we have our hands on some things in the US, on some studies in the US that have samples, but I think this would really benefit from an international level, because a lot of countries have a lot of studies that have stored tissue samples that are blood samples that could be used in this way. One of the things that we're working on as far as the samples from the diabetes prevention study. There's also the samples from the calorie study that would be of very big interest. But again, internationally, there's probably a lot of stuff that if we're collated and organized in one place, and maybe Todd can do this, use artificial intelligence to help with it, because I think we're really missing out as long as we're sticking with our own national available information.
Steve, how would such an international collaboration come about? The idea is being discussed here to get to a stage where several years forward, various databases from different countries have been put together and people are gaining the learnings from that. who here, I mean, I don't know that the Kitalys Institute could do that. Who here can do it? What are the steps that would be needed in order for that to catalyze and get started?
Oh, well, that's a good question. That is, I mean, that takes a very high level of international connections, facilities. I mean, it really requires people that are familiar with the people who control the data. You know, it turns out it's not as easy to get the data as we originally thought that it might be, because people are protective of the data. But it's exactly what we need, is overcoming those barriers. And whether that's a financial issue, whether it's a political issue, I'm not sure, but it needs to be done.
You know, I think if there were a concerted effort to do this by a party like a major university, or perhaps the American Federation, I mean, by some third party that doesn't have a major, I think people might get to be embarrassed into volunteering their data for such an effort.
Yeah, well, I hope you're right, Todd, because we don't. One of the advantages of AFAR is that we don't have, you know, we're not running an agenda. You know, we're simply trying to benefit the field.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to another subject, which is again very challenging, that we just don't have the ecology to incentivize the activity, particularly on the dietary supplement side, or nutritional product side, to get data that will support the use of a product for influencing Healthspan. And we heard from the commissioner many times that FDA just doesn't have the current structure to give dietary supplements or nutritional products a prevention claim as a proprietary product. They can give general sort of class health claims, but they are very limited in what they can do. So that's just one small example. And maybe we could bring back Dave Fox and Stephen Grossman, along with Thomas, to talk about how can we improve the landscape for developing these therapies and getting people to, and not just therapies, but interventions in general. Of course, dietary and other lifestyle interventions are first principles, but when it comes to actual drug device or nutritional product development, how can we do that?
Go ahead, Steve. Steve, you're on.
If I could just get unmuted. The more I've listened, the more I've thought about this over the last couple of days as we've prepped. The commissioner said, go talk to the chief scientist, chief medical officer, and the goal should be to get somebody inside in one of those offices to take on the role similar to what the Office of Combination Products does. It sorts out who should get responsibility for regulation of any given product that's a combination product. And it could work for this. You need people besides the commissioner talking about this, thinking about it. You need a point person. And I know that seems very tactical, but it's the iteration that gets these things to a higher level. You know, can we bring NIH in? Can we do an endpoints conference? And yeah, I don't think there's any straight path, but I think that it's iterative and it needs to be planned. Again, we need an iterative plan, if you will. David? Thomas?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah. I just to be clear, I think there's incentives that need to be addressed from completely different directions. So one is, how do you incentivize the regulators to open their minds and use their flexibility to look at things differently? And then how do you show there adequate protections over the investment to cause people to want to spend money on these programs, when, as the commissioner noted, quite right, that if you're going to be administering something to a healthy population to keep them healthy, it's going to have to be very safe. We're not talking about, typically not talking about new chemical entities with robust composition of matter IP around them, talking about things that are largely generic, ubiquitous, and so harder to protect. On the incentivizing the regulators, again, it was a little, it's a revelation to hear the commissioner so frankly say that the civil servants are the ones who really are determining this, and that he can only speak from a policy platform, and even then, it's not policy unless it's memorialized in writing somewhere. So there's a very, very large gap between the office of the commissioner, as well as Dr. Bumpus, chief medical officer, what they can do from the commissioner's perch, as opposed to what's going on at the staff level. And we know the staff level is very dug in on field function and survival, on hard outcomes. So it's a tough situation. It was very interesting what he said about, I think, about the Lilly data and Alzheimer's, and how that is actually, it could end up forcing the agency's hand on early intervention. Now they're going to have to write a label, assuming the product, product plays out, that's probably going to, balance and restrict who can use it when there's certain onset of symptoms. But I think maybe between the two cases he mentioned, the GLP-1 RAs and the Alzheimer's products, it could be that we will see the agency's hand forced by people who can pay for those products out of pocket and make the decision themselves. And then the question will be, when will the regulators have to catch up to that? Because we're seeing that with the GLP-1 RAs, with people using it who don't fit the BMI criteria for weight loss within the labeling, who are going out and buying it literally out of pocket, a large amount of money. And it's another thing that also, just to bring it into the mix, really raise the issue of equity here, healthcare equity, that there are going to be people who are going to force the use of these products for potentially, Healthspan, by seeking them out and paying for them for themselves. And then we would hope maybe that eventually the regulatory system will catch up to that, so that the products become more available to more people. So that's just a kind of, one observation on incentives for having people invest in the products. I mean, I think, IP is one, but you're not going to really see composition of matter IP, which is really what drives investment. So some form of regulatory barriers to entry, which probably is going to require a legislative solution. Yeah, and as you know, we've been working on that, pretty hard, and even also extending some kind of proprietary protection to people who do that kind of experimentation in the food and dietary supplement area. So he's absolutely right that the dietary supplement law, DSHEA, completely disincentivize developing real evidence about these products. And even the commissioner doesn't really understand what a structure function claim is for an everyday dietary supplement. And that's, noted. I like that. The answer to that really, I think, is short of changing the law, which is not going to be an easy lift, and the politics probably are not right for doing that, is using the flexibility that we know FDA has within the drug regulatory system to create a more, pocket, a lane in which they could look at products as drugs and encourage the development of the evidence, and then reward it within their exclusivity system. The pieces are there. It's the institutional will to use the flexibility for something other than unmet need and rare disease. Even, he talked about accelerated approval. That was not originally a creation of Congress. That was a creation of the FDA staff. And they said, we're willing to accept more uncertainty and use unvalidated surrogates reasonably likely to predict a positive outcome, but we don't know. we don't know, but we're willing to take that risk, that chance, because of the cards on the table here for these patients. And I think the day has come for them to think about how can we also use flexibility and some tolerance for uncertainty to affect the broader population, certainly, I'm a champion of rare disease targets and treatment. But I think the issue is, can we bring that kind of thinking, which the agency is capable of doing and has the authority to do, we bring that into how do we affect larger groups of people who are facing chronic illness for a long period of time that's very expensive to treat, affects all levels of society. So I think we just have to keep, as Steve said, we have to keep pounding away at that. I've said this before, I think every time FDA has a stakeholder meeting on a disease to look at endpoints for a disease, there should be a pre-disease segment of that conversation. And we should be going into the agency every time they're looking at endpoints or issuing a guidance and say that even if you come up with nothing, they should be required to dedicate time to thinking about the pre-disease state. How do we keep people from ever having to face this disease in the first place? And we have to institutionalize or socialize that conversation every time FDA does a guidance on endpoints for disease.
David, you made about 6 or 8 really crucial, important points in just a few minutes' time. Hold those thoughts. I want to bring a few other people in, but we need to say goodbye to Jay Schuyler. He's going to have to jump off. Jay, you did a great job in getting the commissioner to confess that he gets head pain when he thinks about some of these issues. That's a great technical term I'm going to remember. But many thanks, Jay, for bringing that off, and we'll be in close touch.
And I think we need to get all these efforts underway of consensus groups, and let's get it done.
I want to thank you, Jay, and Godspeed. Let's bring in Kate and Larry Steinman to this discussion. We're talking about not only the what, the how do we affect changes? Larry, you chaired a Blue Ribbon Gulf War commission, so you know how that worked. You saw its efficacy. What are your thoughts here about the kind of commission that would sweep across various parts of the government and the private sector?
You're
on mute.
Larry.
Yes, I think we'll take a lot of organizational skills to come close to sweeping through all the various gates that need to be addressed. I was very struck by Commissioner's responses to Eli Lilly's press release this morning about the positive results on the Alzheimer's trial. In the second or third paragraph, they mentioned that about 30% of people exposed to the biologic for 18 months had small brain hemorrhages and brain edema of no great consequence, according to Lilly, just small brain hemorrhages and brain edema. And although the p-values look stellar, and I would certainly predict that the drug will be approved, it gets to a very tricky point for geroscience, so that if there's a drug with potentially significant side effects, early intervention is always going to be the best course of action to block any disease from progressing. But the big question is, will it come along with significant risks? He mentioned significant risks. And I think it all depends. If you live in a family where there was early onset Alzheimer's, let's say in the late 50s or early 60s of life, I'm talking about years of life. One thing to remember is that Homo sapiens living in the United States and mid to upper socioeconomic groups are not like our parents were in their 50s and 60s. Lifestyles are very different, and it's just hard to make those assessments. But since Commissioner is a good surrogate for how this is going to be accepted, it will probably sweep through. And this is a drug that is going to have potentially a lot more serious side effects in a large population than other well-known interventions that help us live longer, like statins and angiotensin modulators. So all I can say is we better fasten our seatbelts. It's not going to be easy.
Well, what I didn't see in the press, in the write-ups of the press release, is what's the background rate for ARIA? You know, is in a population of X over the, you know, with these comorbidities, are those kind of, you know, fatal side effects common? Or, I mean, there was no sense of proportion there. Is that?
You have the vehicle group. It shows it's like half what's in the active group.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're using the placebo, but I don't know, it is possible to get a placebo group that's not representative, and, you know, on every dimension, this might not be one of them.
I think, but all the drugs of this class have this similar side effect, so it's probably real.
Okay.
It's real.
So then we're talking about risk benefit, and I think part of it is for Alzheimer's, they're willing to, I think they're going to prove willing to do risk benefit and say it's worth it. We need to justify risk benefit for lifespan drugs.
Well, I think this comes down to the crux of the problem. And if it does work for people who have advanced disease, that's one thing. The question is, how far could you go? Could it be somebody at risk who has relative or parents with Alzheimer's? Should they be treated? Probably not. That's what would be, in effect, a geroscience approach, if indeed it's affecting other organs and not just the brain. But the problem will be, where do you draw the line in the populations that should be treated?
And we do such a great job with rationing in this country of healthcare. So,
yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah.
Kate, you have fresh eyes to this field. I would like to bring you in and maybe get some of your thoughts about how we could be effective in changing the current situation that is not favorable for developing interventions for people that don't have disease yet. But let's see, Kate, are you on mute?
Is Kate still on?
Okay, she may have dropped off. Margareta, you're still on. You have anything but fresh eyes. You've been in this field from the beginning. What strikes you as interesting or maybe concerning about what you've heard today? And you're on mute if you're saying something. But I do see your picture.
Zan,
Right, well,
maybe I can fill the void for just a moment.
Yeah,
You know, one of the
in fact, I wanted to turn it over to you to give us the some of the best questions that you've seen in the chat.
I can get to that in a moment, but you know, I was struck by the commissioner seeing himself as a referee, as opposed to he was saying in opposition to an advocate for a science or what have you. But you know, I guess I see them more as a guardian than a referee. It's a cultural issue, as Dave Fox mentioned. They have the the means. They have approved preventives like vaccines and statins. They've even regulated interventions that are for conditions that are not diseases like pregnancy. So if they wanted to do it, they could, or at least there's precedent for doing it. But you and I have discussed, Sam, that the transition from reactive disease treatment to proactive precision health, the question is, how is the FDA going to, what role is it going to play? And I think I heard the commissioner say they're not interested in being in the lead. Will they go with the flow? Or are they going to get, this is the uncharitable way of saying, drag kicking and screaming, or being very careful about the steps that they take? And I think that's the tension I see with geroscience. We've talked about treatment of a disease, and now we're talking about focus on the pre-disease state, which I think is really, really important. But at the end of the day, the geroscience dream, I guess, is to take younger, healthier people and keep them from, or delaying aging, or keeping them, et cetera. I guess if the industry and geroscience came up with a real reversal, then that wouldn't run into that issue, because you can go to the FDA and say, hey, look, we're restoring sight or hearing or wrinkles if they regulate that. But the stuff that you don't see that's going on at core in the cellular and molecular levels, that's the great insight of geroscience. And I guess I'm interested to hear from this panel, is it really the FDA's job? They seem to be regulating medicines, and I'm not sure whether those kinds of interventions in the ultimate state are medicines. So I'm curious to hear what people have to say.
It's a treat, cure, prevent, mitigate disease. That's the treat, cure, prevent, mitigate disease.
So what about healthy people who are younger, who are not at levels of excursions from their molecular and cellular and organ processes that rise to the level of being recognized, typically as a disease?
This happens now with hypertension. I mean, people in their 20s are started on agents because it's considered to be a lifelong risk, and the longer you're treated, the lower your ultimate risk is. So there's precedent there too. It's just having to break out of the mindset of one pathway, one disease,
one population, patient population.
Yeah.
Thomas, I was there when he at another event when he gave a little longer explanation, and I think the longer explanation actually is good for us, which is that FDA is involved in setting the rules, and then for specific products, it's the referee as to whether or not those standards have been met.
Right. Okay.
Seen that way, we need to get the rules set. And we're all over the place. I don't know that that's avoidable, but that should be the main thing, is trying to get these questions down. Here are the 4 things we need FDA in the dialogue on. And then you get to the rules, and then they really are the referee. I think we're about to see that the rules for Alzheimer's for the first time have really been met. It's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I see our colleague Pepper Lanson has her hand up. Will Pepper come on and join us?
Unmute.
Pepper, you're on mute.
Try that.
There you go.
Okay, super. The conversation has certainly made strides since the last time we had this conversation, and yet we're still kind of swirling in the same eddies. I think it was Stephen who just commented essentially that focusing on the things that we can move the needle on will have value to us as a community. But the thing that strikes me as being kind of my background of being an operator and a pragmatist is, there's all of the science that the community is generating right now. And yet, where are we aiming the science? We need a road to put it on, right? And folks like Joan, folks like me, and a variety of other folks who are probably on this call are moving agents into clinical trials for healthy aging. And again, that road isn't built yet because endpoints, biomarkers, et cetera, that's all pretty amorphous too. But I wonder, since we're already giving a lot of time and energy and talent to the effort as a community, is there a leading effort, right? I'm going to frame it in the concept of, is there a drug in clinical trials right now, whether it be metformin and tame, which could be in clinical trials if funded, that we as a community could say, look, it's not perfect, but what if we got behind it as an entity, right? A united front, and said, we want to help company X move the needle for all of us. And you are going to be the pioneer in front, right? You are Lewis and Clark for us, and we will support you. We don't have to love necessarily the science. We don't have to love the mechanism, but if it's the right thing that says, FDA, this is the best shot we have come up with as a community, and let's work together to make this happen so that the road is paved for those coming behind it. Is that something we could do as a community?
Well, we sure could advocate. The problem in that case with metformin is there's no company.
Right.
Metformin is way, way off. It never was patented in the US.
Right,
So
but
there's
that's
no
just
company.
an example of
It's
of
one
a good
example
plan,
of,
but perhaps not a
yeah.
great business strategy.
Yeah, but the low-hanging fruit are the drugs that have been approved and used for many years and typically will not have corporate sponsorship. And so that in itself is an issue.
The other thing I was thinking, Pepper, is as Rob was mentioning, 90% of the trials are going to fail. So it'd be nice if we could have multiple shots on goal so that we don't all put all our eggs on the one that fail, or all our eggs in the basket that isn't going to get approved.
Okay. Joan, how does this sound as a strategy, for what you're working on at Tornado, and perhaps what Protego will be working on soon? Should the companies who seem to be in the same arena help each other as it relates to regulatory pathways, so that although we are all small, bundled together like sticks in the biblical story, we are stronger?
Absolutely. I mean, I think even look at what FDA does for oncology. They sort of have templates of how the trials should be run. It would be great if we had templates for, different aging related endpoints that people could use.
Joan, how do we get there? Do we facilitate discussions with FDA, or is it individual companies have them? And then as people, Dave, you're shaking your head. Maybe you can tell us, guide us what you're thinking.
Yeah. We've talked about this before. There's just a lot of barriers for individual companies going in. I mean, and you can have those conversations like a pre-IND. There are these different technology type meetings, but you get a lot of listening from the agency and you don't really get anything back. Or you go in as a company and you have to have a specific product and specific questions, and everything is very tightly held. But this is one place where I think, just to toot our own horn, the Kitalys Institute can help. It would be much easier for us as the Kitalys Institute, with representatives from the companies, to go in as the Kitalys Institute or as a consortium for discussion than it is for an individual company to get in. So if we wanted to meet, for example, with Dr. Bumpus or with the chief medical or chief scientific officer, it's much easier to get on the calendar as either a consortium or as an independent institute than as a specific company. Just to sort of start the conversation, see where their minds are, and then you can go in and try to get more specific. But it's very, it's just it's a world of difference going in as an individual company than going in as an association.
You could imagine conversations about the role of biological clocks, what the agency would need in order to treat them more seriously. Just a question for the panel. What did you think of Rob's answer as to whether it was ready for prime time to be thinking about a dedicated center or office or division or something? I was disappointed, but I don't know that I was entitled to any particular expectations. I would imagine the JARA scientists think we have lots of, we're ready, and what does it take to get the FDA to think differently than what the commissioner just said? Joan, you look like you're about to.
Well, I was dying to ask him. He goes, "Oh, it's not ready yet." And I wanted to go, what's required to be ready? Because it wasn't clear to me. Is it that we have to get this consensus because it's really the sort of outside world that pushes the FDA to do this? Or is it that we need a trial that works? I don't know. Zan, did you have any sense of what he might mean by it's not ready yet?
Well, yeah, I don't. It's a guess, but it's multiple things probably. But we should control what we can control. We can't necessarily directly get in the mind of Califf. We need to take some positive steps forward, and some of the ways that have been outlined. I think Dave Fox, you certainly provided us some a laundry list of ways we can go forward.
I think it's pretty clear that the FDA does respond to external pressure if the external pressure is right. I don't think the first Alzheimer's drug would have been approved without external pressure. Probably the same with the early anti-HIV drugs. So I do think that they could be responsive to pressure. And I thought that his comment about not being ready yet just showed that he didn't have that much familiarity with the field, which is understandable.
Steve, not to be argumentative, but the examples you gave were from patients, sort of a tsunami of patients asking for relief. What is the constituency for anti-aging?
Anybody over the age of pick X.
Seriously,
Pick X.
That works if you have an it, and we have no it to get political behind.
I have sometimes gotten on the phone with these very wealthy, older people, maybe age 80, who are still in good health. They're willing to take so many risks that I'm always shocked. You know, they'll take, with no data, all sorts of stuff that I would think is too risky. So that is an interesting population, the healthy 80s. Because then it really is a life-threatening disease in the short run. And if you're still healthy at 80, there may be a runway there.
So I'm also concerned or think that the penetration of ideas of geroscience in the rest of medicine is something that's important. We talk to each other a lot, so we're all convinced. But I'm not sure how big this world is. And I've still talked to people who are at Wake Forest and tell them, oh, I do geroscience, and they, what is that? That's very interesting. So I think there's a communication problem, and that's really important. And I think in building a constituency and support for FDA to react to, that there's a biomedical community that this is a thing. So I think, I know Jim Kirkland is almost tireless in writing articles about senolytics. And I think this is part of the long plan, the long game is to make sure that this keeps coming up and is keep presented to people in consciousness, not in journals called geroscience, but in general medical journals. So.
Well, folks, all good things must come to an end. We've run over a little bit. It's been terrific. And how great that we could have this community discussion. To Steve's point, we are a kind of self-selected group which don't represent the larger scientific community. And that's a challenge in itself that we need to address. To so many other things that we can do, we've started to learn specific ways we could get FDA to turn its attention towards this field.
Yeah.
But we need to roll up our sleeves together to do that. We are going to provide, of course, the recording of this session and also a transcript. So all of you have registered, and those will be coming automatically to you. But we also want to hear from you. We'd love to hear your thoughts of how we can improve our conference at the technical level. We've got room for improvement for sure, but we're also building our calendar for the sessions to come, and we would love to hear from you about ideas that you'd like to see presented in the conference that is going to run until the end of the year. And we may even have a 1 or 2 day physical movement if things line up. But stay tuned for that. So we, in general, would love to hear from you, and we'd love for you to stay in touch. So with thanks to our panelists, to Jay Schuyler, to Commissioner Rob Califf, we'll say goodbye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.